There's something different about people who grew up in the 1960s. Maybe it's the way they can sit through a crisis without unraveling. Maybe it's how they navigate chaos with a calm that feels almost unsettling. Or maybe it's that specific combination of hope and hard-earned realism that seems coded into their DNA. Because the 1960s didn't just shape a generation, it created a particular kind of psychological wiring that experts are only beginning to fully understand. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why growing up in that decade produced some of the most psychologically resilient and complex people alive today. Let's start with something that shaped every single day of a 1960s childhood in ways most people never consider. Picture yourself as a 7-year-old. It's a Tuesday morning. You're sitting at your desk, wooden and scarred with decades of carved initials. The teacher stands at the front of the classroom and suddenly, without warning, a loud alarm pierces the air. You know exactly what to do. You've done this dozens of times before. You slip out of your chair, duck under your desk, curl into a ball and cover your head with your hands. Duck and cover. The phrase that defined a generation's relationship with fear. You're hiding from something you can't see, can't hear, can't touch. An atomic bomb that might or might not be coming. A threat so enormous that your little wooden desk becomes your shield. Even as a child, somewhere deep inside you understood the absurdity. You knew that if the bomb actually came, that desk wouldn't save you. But you practiced anyway, week after week, month after month, year after year. This wasn't trauma in the conventional sense, it was something stranger and more profound. You learned to live with existential dread as background noise. The world could end tomorrow, and you still had to memorize your multiplication tables tonight. Psychologists now call this productive cognitive dissonance, the ability to hold two completely contradictory truths in your mind simultaneously and function anyway. For 1960s kids, this became second nature. Here's what's remarkable. Instead of creating a generation of paralyzed, anxious adults, this constant awareness of potential annihilation produced something unexpected. People who developed an extraordinary relationship with uncertainty. When you've prepared for nuclear war before your 8th birthday, everyday problems lose their ability to completely overwhelm you. Lost your job? At least you're still breathing. Relationship falling apart? The world is still standing. Facing a health crisis? You've stared down bigger fears than this. This generation learned young that worrying about things completely beyond your control is a waste of precious energy. They developed what researchers now recognize as sophisticated psychological triage, an ability to rapidly sort problems into categories, things I can actually influence and things I simply need to accept and live with. Not because they read about it in a self-help book, but because they absorbed it through their skin during those drills day after day, year after year. Now, let's talk about a Sunday night in February 1964. You're sitting cross-legged on the carpet in your living room. The whole family is gathered around the television set, that massive piece of furniture with the tiny screen, and then they appear. 4 young men from Liverpool with mop-top haircuts and matching suits. The Ed Sullivan Show, the Beatles. The screaming from the audience is so loud you can barely make out the music. Your older sister is actually crying, mascara running down her cheeks. Your mother looks bewildered. Your father looks vaguely concerned, maybe even a little angry, but you're witnessing something you don't have words for yet. The moment culture shifts beneath your feet. The Beatles didn't just change music. They demonstrated to an entire generation that the world could transform overnight, that 4 regular guys with guitars could shake the very foundations of society, that what seemed permanent and unchangeable on Saturday could be completely obsolete by Sunday night. This was formative in ways that went far beyond music preferences and haircuts. 1960s kids learned viscerally that change doesn't happen slowly over generations. It can happen now, this week, today, while you're eating dinner or doing your homework. The ground can shift and suddenly everything looks different. This created adults who aren't threatened by disruption the way other generations often are. They've watched entire cultural landscapes transform before their eyes and survived. They know that what seems shocking and revolutionary today becomes completely normal tomorrow, and what seems permanent and unshakable today might vanish by next year. They understand that stability is an illusion, change is the only constant. But here's the psychological twist. While they witnessed this revolutionary optimism, this sense that anything was possible, they also lived through assassination after assassination. John F. Kennedy in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy just 2 months later. all within 5 brutal years. You watched your heroes get cut down. You saw hope shattered on live television, the footage playing over and over. You learned that progress isn't linear, that the good guys don't always win, that hope and tragedy aren't opposites, they're permanent roommates in the human experience. This combination, revolutionary optimism tempered by repeated devastating loss, created a very specific psychological profile. People who believe change is absolutely possible, but who aren't naive about the costs, who can hope without being foolish, who understand that fighting for something better doesn't guarantee you'll live to see it realized. This isn't cynicism, it's wisdom purchased at an extraordinarily high price. Let's shift to something more intimate, more daily. Imagine you're 8 years old. Your mother opens her purse, pulls out a handful of coins and places them in your palm. Go to the corner store and get a quart of milk, and get yourself something with the change. You walk there yourself, no parent beside you, no adult watching from a distance. Just you, those coins heavy in your pocket and the route you've memorized through the neighborhood. You push open the heavy glass door, the bell jingles. You navigate the aisles, choose what you want, walk to the counter and hand over the money. The clerk counts it, hands you the change. You count it yourself to make sure it's right. Then you walk home, the glass bottle of milk cold against your chest. This wasn't special, this was just Tuesday. Children in the 1960s handled real money from an early age. Not plastic cards that make abstract numbers appear and disappear on screens. Actual coins that had weight in your pocket. Bills you could fold and unfold that smelled like ink and felt like paper. You learned that money was finite because you could literally see it disappearing from your hand as you spent it. This physical relationship with currency created neural pathways that modern children simply don't develop. You understood cause and effect in a visceral, undeniable way. Spend these coins on candy and they're gone forever. Save them and they accumulate. There's no abstract number on a screen disconnecting you from the reality of the transaction. What researchers now call financial executive function, the ability to delay gratification, plan for the future, and understand the true cost of purchases, was being built into these children through daily, tangible experience. They weren't learning about money. They were feeling it slip through their fingers or pile up in their piggy banks. And the independence didn't stop at the corner store. Picture this. It's 7:30 in the morning. You're walking to school. You're 6 years old, maybe 7. There's no parent beside you. No adult watching from behind a curtain. Just you, your books tucked under your arm, because backpacks haven't become common yet, and the route you've memorized through the neighborhood. You pass the house where the mean dog lives and you cross to the other side of the street. You wave to Mrs. Patterson, who's always watering her roses at exactly this time. You meet up with the Thompson kids at the corner and you walk the rest of the way together, a small pack of children navigating the adult world. This daily journey wasn't just transportation, it was education. You learned to read your environment, to notice when something was different, when something felt wrong. You developed internal maps, not just of streets and houses, but of social landscapes, which adults were friendly and which ones to avoid, which houses always had dogs in the yard, which routes were safest and which ones to take only when you were with friends. Neuroscientists have discovered that this kind of autonomous navigation in childhood develops spatial reasoning, risk assessment, and self-reliance in ways that being driven everywhere simply cannot replicate. Your brain was literally being sculpted by independence every single morning before you even arrived at school. Now, let's talk about what happened when you got hurt, because you did get hurt. You fell off your bicycle going down a hill too fast, the handlebars twisting out of your grip. You scraped your knees climbing trees that were probably too tall for you. You burned yourself on a chemistry set that would never, ever pass modern safety standards. You got hit in the face with a baseball because helmets weren't required and barely anyone wore them anyway. And when you came home bleeding or bruised, your parents looked at you and said something that would sound almost cruel, hey world, by today's standards. You're fine. Clean yourself up and go back outside. Your parents weren't being neglectful. They had a different kind of faith in you. Faith that you could handle discomfort. Faith that you would learn from the experience. Faith that protecting you from every scrape and bruise would ultimately do you more harm than the injuries themselves. Here's what this created psychologically. People who don't catastrophize pain, who understand that hurt and damage are not the same thing, who can experience significant discomfort without believing something is fundamentally irreparably wrong. Burns, scratches, and scars weren't emergencies to be prevented at all costs. They were simply evidence of a life being actively lived. Modern psychology is finally catching up to what 1960s parents seemed to know instinctively. Children need to experience manageable adversity to develop what researchers call stress inoculation. Small doses of difficulty build psychological immunity to larger challenges later in life, and 1960s kids got plenty of small doses. But the risks weren't just physical. Consider this scenario. It's a Saturday afternoon. You're in the driveway with your father. The hood of the family car is propped open. He hands you a wrench, an actual tool heavy and real, and shows you how the engine works. Or maybe you're with your mother, learning to use the sewing machine, the needle moving up and down dangerously close to your small fingers as she guides your hands. Children in the 1960s were trusted with real tools, real responsibility, real consequences. The Easy Bake Oven wasn't just a toy, it was a genuine appliance that got hot enough to actually bake food. You could hurt yourself. That was part of the point. Learning to be careful around things that could hurt you was considered essential education. This created adults who aren't intimidated by complexity, who assume they can figure out how things work if they just take the time to look, who don't automatically call an expert for every problem that arises. They grew up taking things apart and putting them back together. They learned that most machines and most problems are less mysterious than they initially appear. Now, let's talk about waiting. Real waiting. The kind that modern humans have almost entirely forgotten how to do. You want to see a new movie. The theatre downtown has one screen, maybe two if you're lucky. Films rotate weekly or sometimes every 2 weeks. You see what's playing or you wait, dear Sid. There's no streaming, no on-demand, no I'll just watch it later. If you miss it during its run, you might never see it. You want to hear your favourite song? You sit by the radio hoping the DJ plays it. You can't skip to it. You can't download it. You can't search for it. You wait. And when it finally comes on, you scramble to press record on your tape recorder, praying you don't miss the beginning, praying the DJ doesn't talk over the intro. You want to know what happens next on your favourite TV show? You wait a week. The cliffhanger sits in your mind, unresolved, for 7 long days. There's no binge watching, no skipping ahead, no reading spoilers online, just anticipation. This rhythm of wanting and waiting literally rewired the brains of an entire generation. They developed what psychologists call delay tolerance to an extraordinary degree. They know in their bones that good things are worth waiting for, that anticipation is its own form of pleasure, that not everything needs to be available immediately to be valuable. In a world of instant gratification, people who grew up in the 1960s carry this capacity for patience like a superpower. They don't panic when things take time. They don't need constant stimulation to feel content. They learned early that the spaces between getting what you want aren't empty. They're full of imagination, anticipation, and life itself. Now, picture a summer evening in 1967. The streetlights have just flickered on, which means you have maybe 10 more minutes before you need to be home. You're in somebody's backyard with 8 other kids from the neighbourhood, finishing up a game of tag or baseball or some hybrid game you all invented that afternoon that has rules only you understand. There are no adults present. No one is supervising. No one is refereeing. No one is mediating. When someone argues about whether they were tagged or not, you work it out yourselves. When feelings get hurt, you figure out how to move forward or the game ends. When the younger kids can't keep up, you decide together whether to include them anyway or tell them to go home. Every social challenge is yours to navigate. This daily practice in human relations created something remarkable. People who can read a room instantly, who sense tension before it surfaces, who understand intuitively that what people say and what they actually mean are often two completely different things. They became expert students of human behaviour, not because they studied it academically, but because their social survival depended on understanding it. You learned whose house you could walk into without knocking, and whose parents required you to ring the doorbell and wait politely. You learned which kids would tell on you and which ones could keep secrets. You learned how to be part of a group while still maintaining your own identity and opinions. These weren't skills taught in any classroom. They were absorbed through thousands of hours of unsupervised social interaction. And they produced adults with what researchers call high social intelligence, the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with apparent effortlessness. But some experiences cut deeper than social learning. Consider what it was like to be a child on July 20th, 1969. You're sitting in front of the television, maybe at home, maybe in a school classroom where they've wheeled in the TV on that tall metal cart. You're watching grainy black and white footage of something that should be impossible. A man in a bulky white suit is stepping onto the surface of the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You're watching the boundary of human possibility expand in real time. Everything your parents told you was impossible, everything the world said couldn't be done, is happening right before your eyes. If we can put a man on the moon, what else might be possible? What limits are actually real, and what limits are just failures of imagination? This moment imprinted something profound on an entire generation. Not just an intellectual belief, but a visceral, bone-deep certainty that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome, that human ingenuity and determination can achieve what seems utterly impossible. When 1960s kids grew up to face their own seemingly insurmountable obstacles, they carried this with them. They'd seen the impossible become possible. They'd watched humanity reach for the stars and actually touch them. That kind of moment doesn't fade, but that optimism existed alongside something much darker. The 1960s were also the decade when evening news broadcasts began showing footage from Vietnam. Real war, real death, real bodies being carried through jungles on stretchers. You'd be sitting at the dinner table, and the television would show things that children today are carefully, deliberately shielded from. Walter Cronkite's voice. The helicopters, the explosions, the faces of soldiers younger than your older brother. This exposure didn't traumatize most of them in the traditional sense. It educated them. They understood from a young age that the world contained genuine horror, that safety was never guaranteed, that adults didn't always make good decisions, that authority could be wrong, even catastrophically, fatally wrong. This created a generation with an extraordinarily complicated relationship to institutions and authority. They respect competence, but not credentials. They follow leaders who earn trust, not those who simply demand it based on position. They learned young that questioning authority isn't disrespectful. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary for survival. And yet despite everything, despite the assassinations and the war footage and the nuclear drills, despite watching their heroes fall and their hopes shatter on national television, there's something almost defiant about the resilience of 1960s kids. Because they also remember the March on Washington. They remember the Civil Rights Act passing. They remember watching the world actually change because people believed it could and refused to accept it couldn't. They hold both truths simultaneously. The world can be terrible, and the world can get better. Progress is possible, but never guaranteed. Hope is rational, but never naive. This psychological complexity, this ability to believe and doubt at the exact same time, might be their most valuable inheritance. Let's return to something simpler, more daily. Picture yourself on a Saturday morning. The television is showing cartoons. You watch for a few hours, completely absorbed. But then something happens. The programming ends. The station signs off or switches to something boring, a fishing show, a religious program, something clearly not meant for you, and you're faced with a choice. Sit there staring at a screen that's offering you nothing, or go find something to do. So you go outside. You explore the creek, catching tadpoles in an old jar. You build forts from scrap wood. You lie in the grass watching clouds drift by. You get bored, and then you get creative. This cycle repeated throughout 1960s childhoods. No infinite scroll, no endless content. Just empty time waiting to be filled by whatever you could imagine. Neuroscientists now know that boredom activates the brain's creativity centers. Every time a 1960s kid stared at a ceiling or wandered aimlessly, their brain was doing important work. These became adults who can sit in silence without discomfort, who don't need constant stimulation to feel okay, who can be alone with their thoughts. In an age of endless distraction, this capacity for stillness is becoming rare and invaluable.